That's it, we're on.
Right. Good evening, councillors. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The first item on our agenda is apologies for absence. I can see Councillor Davies, I know, has sent apologies.
And Councillor Fuller,
And
yeah.
Councillor Fuller.
Yes.
Do we accept those apologies?
Yes.
The next item on our agenda is representation from interested parties who have arrived just on cue. Alex Grant and Jen Snowden, representatives from Staunch. Follow, if not on every meeting, seems to be on quite a lot of our meetings. So, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning to be on usually. We'll bring forward a chair and speak here, if that's okay. I'm Alex Grant. I live in Titchmarsh. I'm a member of the steering committee of Staunch and I was until recently in the Parish Council of Titchmarsh. And this is Jen Snowden, who's our committee, who's very much specialising in sort of fundraising aspects of our work. Doing a very good job at that. You clearly know, I know that you and I, David, have been on at least one Zoom call about this, or one Zoom call that's been discussed. It sounds like you've been talking about this at previous meetings, so I'm going to try not to tell you stuff you already know. You obviously know where Titchmarsh is 5 miles due south of it, the crow flies. We are a group that was set up in 2020 under a different name. We were originally called Save the Glebe Land, because the crucial thing to remember here is that there are two quite separate planning applications, albeit for adjacent pieces of land, and both for large warehouse developments. The first piece of land, it's actually the site of, the smaller of the two, but arguably more prominent, is called, or at least is known by us as the Glebe Land. That is very much adjacent to the A605, between the A605 and the road Islington that basically runs southwards from Titchmarsh towards existing Heldens Parkway Industrial Estate. That's site 1. Site 2 is just to the east of that, so directly south of the village of Titchmarsh on the north side of the A14, and to the immediate east of the existing Heldens Parkway industrial estate. So just to explain, this is not the clearest of images, but that is the existing Heldens Parkway industrial estate. This is from the front cover of our parish newsletter a few months ago. If both developments went ahead, you can see quite clearly in those photos, and I have to pass this around, you will see that the existing Heldens Parkway industrial estate will more or less quadruple in size, because there'll be an extension to the north, that's the Glebe Land site, there'll be an extension to the east, that is a separate site, which by the way has been called by the developer land adjacent to Huntingdon Road, Thrapston, which is rather misleading. We are calling it, and it is generally now known, even by the developer, as the Castle Manor Farm site, because Castle Manor Farm is the farmhouse that's currently on building. Sorry, the farmhouse is currently on the site, which will be obliterated by the warehouses if they get planning permission. So both sites, it's crucial that both sites are currently entirely greenfield. There was an attempt which we saw off, I think, by the applicant for the Castle Manor Farm site to argue that it was partly a brownfield site because some of the land had been used for gravel extraction about 20 years ago, but that has since been returned to farmland. So both sites are completely greenfield. The other crucial thing to remember is that neither site is designated in any way in the existing local plan or the draft new local plan as suitable for development of any kind. So our objections to this is, I think Titchmarsh, it's fair to say, has taken a fairly pragmatic approach to development in the past. We're not against the growth of the village. There has actually been new housing development in the village in the last 10 years, which has generally been welcomed, including some new affordable housing, which we're very happy to see. There was an application a few years ago for a minor expansion of the Haldens Parkway industrial estate. An existing company was Saco to expand their factory, which I don't think the parish council objected to. The concern we have about this development is that it's the principle of the fact that it is land that has not currently been designated in the local plan as suitable for development, but also simply the scale of this, in that Haldens Parkway, as I'm sure you know, is at the moment I guess by Midland standards, a medium-sized industrial estate. If either or both developments went ahead, would at least double in size. If both applications went ahead, it would quadruple in size, and it would become one of the largest logistics parks in the whole of this region. I guess the other thing to bear in mind is, actually, two more factors I want to stress really is, firstly, traffic. Both developers have made much of the fact that there is supposedly direct access to the sites from the A14, which is simply not the case. Traffic will have to come and go from the A605 via at least 2 or 3 roundabouts before it reaches the A14. The capacity of the junction at the A14 at that point, junction 13, is already very stretched, particularly at peak times, particularly when there are shift changes on existing warehouses. There are some minor changes to junction 13 proposed, but very, very minor. A short stretch of the A605 directly north of the A14 will have a 3rd lane added between the 2 roundabouts. But I think the concern that we have, and it's certainly a concern for you, I'm going to comment into why I think Oundle needs to be concerned about this, is that both applicants, while acknowledging there will be a big increase in lorry movements and car movements, I mean, not just hundreds, but several thousands of extra car and lorry movements per day on the A605. While they acknowledge that, and their transport assessments have not tried to cover that up, it's very difficult to cover up the fact that a large development or 2 large developments like this will generate lots of lorries. They are claiming that the vast majority of the lorries will come and go via the A14 and will not use the A605 apart from that short stretch of the A14, apart from that short stretch of the A605 that connects the industrial estate to the A14. They are claiming that only a very small number of extra lorries will travel up and down the A14 up and down the A605 via the Oundle bypass, to the Oundle bypass to and from Peterborough, which we think is highly unlikely, given the fact there was already a lot of lorry traffic on the A605, as we all know, and a lorry heading southbound from, say, Doncaster towards the industrial estate would be directed both by sat-nav and by common sense to turn off the A1 near Peterborough, take the A605 southbound, rather than take the A40, rather than take the A1 all the way down to Huntingdon and then turn westbound on the A14. So there are some fundamental problems with the traffic assessments, which are still being thrashed out with the 2 councils, with the council on 2 applications. I think there's a big gap between expectation and likely reality. The second concern we have is in terms of employment. Now, both applicants are making extravagant promises of several thousand new jobs across the 2 sites, which would be welcome if there was a large labour pool locally which was underemployed. But as we know, this area has not got a high level of unemployment. There are some structural problems in the Northamptonshire economy. I think there are, frankly, too many unskilled jobs and not enough skilled employers. But most employment in warehousing and logistics, as you probably know, is in poorly paid shift work, packing orders, moving things around by low loader or forklift truck and what have you, and will often pay, although obviously that's being pushed up by inflation, will often pay about £10 to £15 an hour. And the existing warehouses, both in Thrapston and elsewhere in the area, Rawns, Kettering, etc., are finding it incredibly difficult to recruit. Thrapston, as you know, is a town roughly the same size as as a landlord. About 7,000 or 8,000 people with a unemployment rate, depending on how you count it, but the unemployment rate by one measure is about 3%, which is lower than the national average, indeed the regional average. And again, the applicants have been somewhat mendacious in arguing that Thrapston and its surrounding villages are some terrible unemployment black spot. They've done so by looking at the unemployment figures from November 2020, which is when the COVID lockdown was at its height and when unemployment levels were temporarily inflated by a large number of people being put on furlough. That's another example of how we think there's a big difference between fantasy published by the applicants and reality on the ground. So our concern is that if either or both applications went ahead, it would be incredibly difficult to recruit staff to the warehouses, certainly locally, so those would have to commute a very long distance, adding to traffic problems. But also there's an issue around staff welfare, and that there have been some quite harrowing stories in the local media lately about staff who work in logistics warehouses in the Corby area and elsewhere in the county for that matter, who are being busted weekly from as far afield as Leicester, London, or even Scotland, having to stay 4 or 5 nights a week in very unsuitable accommodation, in some cases, converted shipping containers, simply because it's very difficult for logistics parks to recruit locally. So, I mean, our argument is, if new logistics capacity is needed in this part of the Midlands, which is a big if, it makes sense to locate it firstly nearer to large areas of population, where you would not more likely to have a labour pool within walking or short driving distance, and ideally to place logistics parks like this in line with national policy, as it happens, near to or directly adjacent to railway lines. Both sort of staff can come and go by train and public transport if possible, but also the goods themselves can come and go by freight, which is something I think actually both Labour and Conservative governments have encouraged for about the last 25 years. And as we both know, as we all know, public transport in this area is exceptionally poor. Thrapston and Titchmarsh are just like Arundel, at least 10 miles from there as well. About our nearest railway station is Kettering, actually, the crow flies, slightly close to Kettering than Huntingdon, but the distance as the crow flies from these two sites, Kettering railway station, is 10 miles or more. So you can hardly argue that that's adjacent to a railway line. So what is Staunch doing about the two applications? Well, as we said, the campaign began in 2020 with the submission or the suggestion of a planning development on the Blue Land. It was then followed quite soon after by proposals for the adjacent Castle Manor Farm site. Important to stress that Glebe Land is owned by the Church of England. The Castle Manor Farm site is in completely different ownership, even though they are side by side. Both applications have now been consulted upon and submitted. Neither application has been determined. We don't have a date when they come to committee. We're told they may both go to committee at the same time, but we don't know when yet. We're expecting it to be later in 2022. We think partly because the arguments that are going on between the applicants and the developer about traffic, that might be delayed until early 2023. So at the moment we're in a period of limbo between the formal period of consultation and planning application ending and then going to the council for determination. Staunch has done a lot of work in terms of raising awareness both in Titchmarsh and Thrapston and beyond of both applications. Both applications, I think, have received record numbers of objections. We've also, thanks to Jen and other members of the committee, got quite a lot of media attention, both in terms of print media, the local websites like the NN Journal, and local television. We've also done a lot of work in terms of measuring the biodiversity of both sites. Both sites are arable farmland, but they do have historic hedgerows which date back to enclosure in the 1770s, if not beyond. Also, of course, we have, in very close proximity to the Glebe Land site, we have Titchmarsh Lakes, which are nationally important habitat for wetland birds. It's been recognised as a Ramsar site, which one of these terms I think a few months ago, but apparently we certainly recognise the Ramsar site is an internationally important wildlife habitat. So there is evidence that a lot of rare bird species do use both sites for foraging. There's also evidence of badgers, hares, and so on and so forth. We've also been involved in discussions with some other parish councils in the immediate area about whether we should, in the medium term, help reduce the development threat of this sort of very large logistics warehouses, seek designation of the Nene Valley as an area of outstanding natural beauty, which I know we want to talk to Annual Town Council about in due course. Those discussions are at quite an early stage, but the government, when I say the government, I mean the Boris Johnson government. I'm not sure if the recent change of Prime Minister has changed the situation, but certainly the government was until recently saying they were seeking new designations of area of outstanding natural beauty, particularly in regions of the country where there are not existing areas of outstanding natural beauty. The East Midlands has no area of outstanding natural beauty apart from the Lincolnshire Wolds, which are about 60 miles north of here. So we would hope, given stakeholder support from the parish and town councils and the local authority in the area, whether an application for an area of outstanding natural beauty could be looked upon kindly. It's important to recognise, by the way, one thing I haven't mentioned so far, that modern warehouses are up to 80 feet high. In both these sites, the maximum height of the warehouse proposed, I think the height of all the warehouses proposed is 24.5 metres, which is 80 feet. So roughly, it's not quite as high as what Church Spire here in Amble, because that is unusually tall, but that is actually the same height, or only 5 feet less, I believe, than the height of Titchmarsh Church Town, which, as we know, is a fairly prominent landmark in the area. So if you bear in mind, particularly Glebe is effectively on a hillside, facing westwards onto the Nene Valley, the impact on the landscape would be quite serious. It's also important to remember that the T in staunch, staunch, by the way, stands for Save Titchmarsh, Thrapston, and the Upper Nene countryside and habitats. This isn't just a NIMBY campaign based in Titchmarsh. In fact, paradoxically, both development sites will be, because of the topography of the land and trees and so on, both sites will largely be visible from Titchmarsh itself, though obviously we will see the potential traffic impact if cars and lorries have to cut through the village. So it's not just about protecting our private views here in Titchmarsh, it's very much about concern about the wider area. There are places on the other side of, or your villages on the other side of the River Nene, Lowick, Islip, Old Winkle, Watton Hole, and so on and so forth, from which the Glebe site in particular will be highly visible, and some currently unsport views across the Nene Valley will be very badly affected, certainly if that application went ahead. So another thing we'll be doing, and part of the reason why we're here tonight, is building links with local parish councils in the area and with Thrapston Town Council in particular, which is, as you know, Thrapston is only 2 miles from the centre of Titchmarsh. In fact, both applications are actually largely within the parish of Thrapston rather than the parish of Titchmarsh. So I'm going to wrap up now, but just 3 things I just stressed before I bring in Jen. 3 things we could really do with your help with are, firstly, to object to planning applications if you haven't already done so. Although the formal period of consultation is over, the council is still accepting submissions on the planning applications until they go to committee, either later this year or early next year. And it would be very useful, I think, to have comments from the next nearest market town to the 2 sites. Clearly, it is of material interest to Amble and surrounding villages, both in terms of the precedent it set for the development on the greenfield sites, but also about potential traffic impact on the A605. I guess the second thing we would appreciate your help with is publicising our existence and our events. We've got a very sophisticated website, which I know you've seen already. It'd be good if you could perhaps write a story about us in your town council magazine, And lastly, there is also going to be a potential financial cost in terms of if this application does go to a planning appeal. Say, for example, both applications get turned out by Northwood Hampshire Council, it's likely the applicants will go to appeal, will need to be represented in that type of inquiry, and that, obviously the legal cost of that could be quite serious. So I'm certainly not expecting a blank cheque from Andover Town Council tonight, but that's something to think about in the sort of medium to long term. That's it for me, really. I hope I haven't talked around all the subjects, but I tell you lots of things already, but it'll be good to give a sort of brief overview of the two sites we're talking about here. Jen, I'm sure will want to add something about our marketing and fundraising efforts.
Very little to add to that, actually, other than we are looking at the cumulative impact of these developments. On the axis you mentioned, the other developments at the north end of the 605, which is the A1 West, which is another 4.5 million square foot of potential logistics and warehousing park. The only access to that is going to be via the 605, or access to that from the A1. So in addition to these two particular developments, that the cumulative impact with the traffic on that as well will just be horrendous. Staunch have very recently put in an application to become registered as a charity. The reason for that being is that our remit has moved beyond just these two developments, although obviously they are front of mind at the moment, because we are committed to protecting all of the Declan Valley from speculative development and opportunistic development. Fundraising is tough going. It's very difficult to convince people to contribute to a fund about 2 sheds in Northamptonshire, and you've got the fallout from Brexit, you've got fallout from COVID, you've got Ukraine, you've got all the recent stuff that's come out of the government very recently. So money is very tight, and getting people to commit is very tight. The argument that we hear often is that it's a fait accompli, it's a done deal, that there's nothing that can be done. That's not true. We have to fight. So we are actively fundraising. That's, as I said, very difficult. We have a healthy slush fund at the moment. We have joined forces with the Nene Valley Association. They've actually sort of come under our umbrella now, and Titchmarsh Parish Council have been very generous as well. But we will, I suspect, at some point need to do another very big fundraising push if, God forbid, this is passed and we have to go to appeal, or we have to go to appeal very quickly because both developers take it to appeal. So we just need help. We need visible. It's very difficult to become visible amongst all the noise out there. So that's where we really are looking for relationships with other parish councils to help us get the word out.
Well, thank you both. If we've got questions, we'll probably need to sort of cap this at about 8 o'clock-ish, because we've got other matters on the agenda. But does anybody have any questions for our representatives from Staunch?
I do. Where else could these warehouses go? And presumably they'll say there's a need. The industry needs them. Thinking about if we were ever to present alternatives to them, is that something that there's any idea of?
There's myriad developments, so they're popping to every place. If you come on the 14 from Kettering, there's millions of square foot being popping up all along there. We did some research not so long ago of West, and we found out that there are 400,000 square foot of redundant empty warehousing currently in the NN14 area alone.
Right.
So, as Alex said, greenfield sites are not where they should be picking up. There are plenty of brownfield and sites that are probably better suited than where they are. We asked the question of Newlands, who one of the developers, and just said, well, just out of interest, why? Why this particular piece of parcel of land? And they said, because it came up.
Right.
And a lot of these applications, a bit like a lottery, a lot of these applications are being put in speculatively on the basis that a fraction of them will be given approval. So it's not done on the basis of which sites are necessarily best suited for warehouse development. It's, as Jen says, which sites are available let's just put out planning applications for
It's not-
internal sites on the basis that by law of averages, 2 or 3 of them might get planning approval, which is, I mean, in my view, no way to do planning. The whole point of planning is that you plan in advance where certain land use is suitable, and then you expect planning applications to come in accordingly. You don't have the planning applications come in and then change the land use. I mean, of course, the developers are saying, predictably, they're saying that the forecast of need for new logistic capacity that were made 3 or 4 or 5 years ago are now out of date because you've had Brexit, you've had COVID, you've had war in Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, there seems to cite every major news event seems to generate more need for logistics. And it is certainly true that internet shopping is here to stay and it's not going away anywhere soon. But there are 2 things that 2 points that we're making in response to that is, firstly, surely you should be redeveloping existing warehouse capacity first rather than building new warehousing on greenfield sites. One of the problems is that it makes more sense economically for them to build
fresh.
Exactly. Build new warehouses from scratch on greenfield sites rather than redevelop brownfield sites. You see they can get planning permission, of course. And secondly, in terms of employment, in the medium term, or the medium to long term, a lot of these jobs are going to be mechanised. Therefore, they don't necessarily need to have large car parks attached, and they certainly don't necessarily need to. This is going to have to slightly contradict what I was saying earlier about being near a sense of population. In the long term, it's likely that in fact some warehouses already are largely staffed by robots. Therefore, you don't need to have huge areas of car park around them, for example, which is what they're proposing. And they seem to be somewhat, developers seem to be somewhat silent about that, of course, because they don't want to remove the tantalising offer of lots of new jobs for local people from their from the plans.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one quick question? Presumably, you've been approaching the MP, Tom Pursglove. What's his position?
Very sympathetic. Tom Pursglove has met with us, I think, twice. We're due to seek a 3rd meeting with him. He obviously says quite rightly that it's a planning matter for North Northants Council, so he's not a decision maker on it, but he has been surprisingly, very content to meet with us and has written to the council about both applications. So he's been very sympathetic. The council itself, David Brackenbury, who is the cabinet member, I think his official title is Regeneration Growth or Economics of Growth, but he's basically the cabinet member for planning and economic development for North Northamptonshire, and happens to be a councillor for Thrapston, along with his wife Wendy and Jeff Shacklock. All 3 of them have been very sympathetic, have come to public meetings, have come to the exhibitions. David Brackenbury has said publicly on 2 occasions at quite large public meetings, both in Titchmarsh and in Thrapston, that neither of the 2 sites is in the development plan, so it is likely that the council will not approve them. He hasn't quite said that the council will turn them down, but he certainly dropped heavy hints in that direction, which is, I found, surprising, but pleasantly surprising. I think that's the general view of Staunch as well. So the council, if you be fair to the council are, you do not seem to be rolling over on this, and I think one of the reasons why we don't yet know when they go to committee is the planning that the council is asking questions about things like traffic. What will happen when it comes to committee? I used to chair a planning committee as long as 10 years ago. So I know these things can't always be predicted in advance. But clearly we are maintaining gentle, polite, but persistent pressure on our local politicians. And while it's not directly in your patch, if you could also raise your own concerns about this application with the council and IMP, that would also be immensely helpful.
Well, I think on behalf of all my colleagues, I'd like to thank you for that very clear presentation. It's given us, I suspect, yet more food for thought, and undoubtedly we'll have that on our next agenda.
I would just say that I'm sorry I haven't brought any information to hand out to you, but we're quite a modern paperless campaign. But all the information you'll ever need to see is on our website, www.staunchcampaign, all one word, .org, which is information and maps and reviews of the two sites and what have you. Can I just ask David, has Oundle Town Council objected to the two planning applications so far?
No.
Okay. And would you be willing, even though it's outside the official consultation period, would you be willing to write to the council about them at this stage?
And I'm certainly willing to discuss it at our next meeting. I'm not going to commit the council to say what the decision might be, but we hadn't previously expressed a view. I think perhaps taking the view that it was a little off our patch, but I've become increasingly concerned on what I've seen. And I suspect my colleagues may very well now be feeling that we should at least make our position clear, regardless, as it were, of whether we're inside or outside official response times. So we will certainly discuss it, and we'll certainly let you know what our decision on that is.
I mean, the council has made it very clear to us that they will accept comments from the public or from interested parties until the agenda is printed, which may well not be the new year. So there's certainly not some sort of lack of time. And if there's any information you need from us, do by all means email us. We'll be happy. But I think it's been very useful to get in touch with our respective councils and actually not a parent councillor, Titchmarsh anymore, because I'm moving shortly. But certainly it's good to make connection with our campaign and the council. So thanks for inviting us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, the next item on our agenda is any disclosure of pecuniary interest in the matters we're about to discuss. No? Any other interests? Equally none. Minutes of the previous meeting, which was that held on the 6th of September, being circulated. Present were Councillor Arnold, myself, Councillor Chesser and Councillor Fuller. Somebody want to propose those or seek any revisions?
I don't see anything. Propose we accept.
Councillor Chesser. Councillor Arnold. Those in favour? Right. On to the planning applications and a sense of deja vu. This is the third time that we've been asked to look at plans for one new road, the Picarthy site. It is one of those where, frankly, we probably need to see some pictures. So if we can get that up. Whilst that's being done, I have circulated a report. And of course, we did object on the last occasion, back in May, when we considered this, essentially two bases. One, concern about site access, and we worried about its proximity to the new road station at the junction, and even attempts to move it didn't really take it that much further away from the junction, but did of course move it even closer to the recreation ground. So we continued to assert that it was going to happen with rather access was from Bridgeview. It's fair to say the new plans do not show any change to Bridgeview or in effect any change to the most recent site access as far as I could see. We also objected because there used to be a pair of semi-detached houses that would front New Road. And we worried about the impact of those houses on the listed building that is number 1 Station Road. Between the first iteration of the plans and the second, we were pleased to note that some changes had been made. Dormer windows, which we weren't very happy about, had disappeared between iteration 1 and iteration 2. And issues around the possibility of relocating or getting rid of, which I think is more our preferred view, those 2 properties, so that you'd actually end up simply with the properties that front Station Road and get rid of the 2 properties on Station Road altogether. That was essentially our previous view. And the difficulty with this application is that it addresses neither of those issues. Indeed, if anything, it seems to me it's gone backwards, because looking at the most recent plans, they seem to have reinstated the dormer windows on the semi-detached property, which remains in relatively close proximity to the listed building at number 1. So in terms of have they altered it in a way that meets our concerns, the answer, it seems to me, is no, not at all. Presumably, however, these plans have come forward as a result of an interaction between the site owners and the planners. So we can only assume that they have tried to meet issues that the planners have raised. Although I confess I found it quite difficult looking at the new plans and looking at the old ones to see very much in the way of any significant difference. I'm down here, I'm trying to work it out. There's a whole raft of things from the 13th of September, but actually, if we keep going down and we look at earlier documents, interesting. Do you know what? That's altered since I swear that's altered since I looked at it at the weekend.
I'm in the listed building consent one. Do you want the other one?
Shall we just try the other one? Just wondering. Because my recollection when I looked at it was that you could see easily what it was in May and what it was planned to be now, but actually you couldn't seemingly get further back. Remarkably little. I'm convinced that the way it is now appearing is different to how it appeared at the weekend. Because my recollection was I couldn't get back to the earlier 2021 stuff at all, but there were plenty of images from April, which of course were those that we were commenting on in May. Let's just take a look at that and see what it shows. But right, so this is April, and despite the relatively modern appearance of those properties, with the dormer windows there and the long windows over doors, we basically weren't concerned about these. We appreciated the drop in height here and the lack of dormer windows here, but the issue was this property here and the issue of the site access. which is not very clear at all off this unless it goes any further down. I think it does, no, it doesn't get any clearer at all. But bear in mind that view, which mirrors that one in the end. And then if we go back to the newer ones, now, let's try,
You scroll a bit further up, then you look at the pictures, yeah?
well, I think probably
Street scenes.
if we look at,
This one.
try those two. Right, so here we have it again. We still seem to have got access over here. So this is closer to it because they moved the access further away. But bizarrely, having taken off the dormer windows that we had objected to, they've reappeared on this latest iteration. So we've got dormer windows and we've got these skylights. And I must admit, try as I may to see any other significant changes, I was struggling. If you look at, yeah, so there's the rear view of what are the main properties.
Which one's one now?
Yeah. Let's just have a look at those street scenes. So this is the latest iteration. And of course, here's the semi, which has also got not only dormer windows at the front, but also here at the back. Access here. But I couldn't see any other particularly obvious changes that I could recall. And actually, my guess is that almost shows us enough. It might be possible to see the front end view if we just find a different one of those. Got one and see what that says. Yeah, so there's the front end view. And again, we've got the dormer windows there. In this view, this looks relatively close to that. And it struck me that in reality, having objected previously and having not seen anything in those plans that addresses any of our concerns, and indeed actually seems to me to reinstate one of the things we thought we got rid of, I assume we're going to want to object again. In a sense, reiterating what we said at take 2, but introducing some of what we said at take 1 about the dormer windows on the pair of semis. Unless anybody disagrees.
Now, I imagine what they might have thought is, give it a bit of time, we'll sneak them back in and see if they notice.
Yeah.
So it snaps
Yeah.
up.
It's really odd.
So
Absolutely.
human for a bit and then put it back on.
Yeah, that entrance, still there, still dangerous.
Right,
Yeah, that's the bit that worries me the most.
it's the entrance itself. Yeah.
So does anyone know what was there before it was a petrol station and warehouses? Was it a big field?
Well, I don't know the site prior to that. Of course, what is now Bridgeview used to be a second co-op supermarket.
Yeah.
There was a huge,
And before that, it was Ben
Shut-
Burgess's.
yeah, I don't know, I mean, just the garage site.
Yeah, but on the garage side, I mean, the garage controls on.
Yeah.
Okay, yes,
Um,
it's always been.
So
Then we had a big store on the land that's now the,
Bridgeview
British.
was a big store, but before that, it was Ben Burgess, the agriculture
Yeah.
machinery people.
Yeah.
Um, So it seems to me it doesn't meet any of our previous concerns, so I think it's another objection. And I'll put something together from you.
Yeah.
I think that the owners seem to think that they'll have got their permission because they're closing this month.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, I mean, they seem to have assumed that they will get that permission, because, yeah, Councillor Chess is right, sadly, we are going to lose the last garage in Amble.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, but there we are. I just have a sneaking suspicion that in whatever way those plans differ from those previously presented, and I am struggling, they must have assumed that in some way it meets other parties' concerns. There weren't any new objections, as it were, on there from May, when I looked on Sunday. Anyway, what day of the weekend it was. The only member of the public who seemed to have commented at all was a resident of Bridgeview, who didn't much like our idea that access should be on Bridgeview.
Fair enough.
But there you go. So, unless anybody has anything else they want to add or contribute.
So what are we going to say then?
So, well, I think we will simply reiterate,
I honestly can't see a single change. Start looking at the same picture.
it is very much part of that, as I say, the door will
Yeah,
simply
yeah.
come back again, which we thought we'd objected away successfully. So it's essentially an amalgamation of our first concerns and our second concerns, and I'll just put something together on those lines. Right, that moves us on to the second, very necessary short list of planning applications tonight. And this is trees, appropriate to get the discussions we've had previously. It's the occupiers, on shore, who want to fell 2 conifers. It may be worth putting this up simply because there's a rather useful little, I almost hesitate to use the photograph, you'll see what I mean when I bring it up in case people haven't seen it. But essentially they're saying, look, the tree is blocking light to our kitchen and creating shading, so they're of low amenity value given their time. That's probably a fair comment. And they do appear to be pretty close to the property. So if you look at the plans and drawings, there you go. Now, that is the image that they produced.
Wow.
It's not so easy to see, but here there are some dotted lines that represent the conifers, because it is not exactly a very good quality photograph, but they are very close to that part of the building. And that seems to be the reason for trying to get rid of it.
That house has gone on the market again, it's on the market at
Oh, right,
present. There's a high turnover these days.
Is that the one that they?
Which
It's the very old low one, to sort of, that's on the corner
I
of.
think, yes, there is a
East
location
Road.
back, so
Yeah.
let's just get the location plan up in case people are not aware of where it is.
It's a very old, little old property.
It's on the corner, isn't it? They just sold the
Is that one
garage back
next
of
to
it.
oh,
They've just,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
the garage at the back seems to be some kind of an office and all
They
that.
just sold it off, haven't they? Sold that off
Yes,
first,
yes.
and then,
I don't think they owned it previously.
Oh, okay.
I think that was always for many years in their ownership.
Think about these drawings, they look old. So how sure are we that that's the accurate, true representation of the property today?
The short answer is, we don't know. I think that short of going on to the property, I'm not sure that it would be possible to really gauge that. The only observation I would have is the tree type, I suppose, as much as anything else. They are
Yeah.
quote unquote only conifer stroke leyland trees.
Got no idea how ancient that photograph is.
Yeah.
They might just have a black and white printer. You know, yeah, so just on the face of it, yeah, it doesn't seem
I
to be a
think
problem,
the tree
does it?
surgeon's opinion should be
Yeah,
sought. Personally, I love all trees except Leylandia.
yeah.
Yeah. I have some issues with
My
my
house is
neighbouring.
dominated by shrubs as well.
Strawberry high trees.
And
Yeah.
they do grow enormously big.
I mean, yeah, aside from that. It's just the evidence doesn't seem very.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is, given the tree type, I would be astonished if the tree officer had any real problems with it.
No, I don't touch it, but.
So I suspect it would be probably an appropriate one to say no objection subject
Subject,
to any
yeah,
contrary view from the tree
Yeah.
officer.
yeah.
Um,
In case there is any.
in case there seems to be anything that we're missing there, but
And we don't want to be, as it were, opening the floodgates by not,
no, I mean,
however much we don't like the type,
yes,
it not being a suitable tree for where people seem to plant it.
yes, I mean,
But they do plant them.
I suspect the issue there might have been that they, and it's pure speculation, but sometimes you buy these things and you think they're relatively dwarf ornamental type
They're not
things.
even relatively.
And then they go up and up and
Absolutely.
up. And all of a sudden, something that wasn't an issue becomes one. So, no objection subject to any contrary view. Which brings us to one final application. This is for a property at 11. It says 1 on the agenda, but it's actually 11 I think.
It says 1 on the paperwork.
I'm pretty sure it says 11 somewhere else.
No, 1 I think.
It's like what is
Oh,
that?
have you taken that little thing there to be a 1?
Oh, I mustn't do.
Yeah, it's definitely 1, I think.
Okay, it may be that my report's wrong rather than everything else, in which case my apologies. So this is a twofold application. One is to build a small sort of lean-to extension to the kitchen with in effect a glazed roof here. And you can see that, is this the existing or is this the proposed? This is the proposed. So there's the extension. And you get a glazed roof, which is essentially a sloping roof there. It's extremely difficult to see why we'd have any possible issues with any of that. At the moment, you've got a garage here, and indeed on the existing plans it still shows that as a utility and laundry. Though when you look at the existing access, strangely it looks like a double door to the garage. So yeah, so over there, that looks like double doors. But that appears to be some sort of utility area rather than a garage, from what I can work out from the drawings at any rate. And the idea is to simply build an extra ensuite bedroom over the garage and link it into the property. So we go back to the new plan. So we add that over the garage, and we simply create an ensuite with a window looking that way, which has a Juliet balcony. There, and then what appears to be 2 windows.
East
on
Road,
that side.
isn't
The windows kind of to match.
The one that faces the road, isn't it?
The materials are all kind of to match existing in terms of the roofing will be slate, the walls will be brick and a sort of timber boarding effect.
I don't have any objection.
I couldn't see anything obvious. It would appear from the drawing, if I've interpreted it right, that there are effectively 3 parking spaces in front of the garage, plus of course you could get a vehicle into the garage. And I think 3 parking spaces for a 5-bedroom property is considered sufficient. So there doesn't appear to be a parking issue, it doesn't alter the access, no trees or hedges affected. I would like Councillor Chester.
Is one of the brand new houses that's just been built?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, it's a relatively new.
Very
No one's
new.
even in that property.
No, they're in them, they were the last ones before, it's the same developer who's done the 2 next to Joan Strong Centre. So they're the new ones that nobody's living in at the moment, it's the ones behind, and they're all,
Yes.
yeah.
So I know we also
So, yes, I mean,
It's the one right on the front.
I mean, it's the classic scenario, isn't it? People take a look at a property and then think, well, we could extend this and it somewhat changes its nature. Except that it is already a 4-bedroom property. It's not like we're losing some 2 or 3-bedroom property that's going up to 4 or 5.
That is
It's a
true.
4-bedroom property becoming a 5-bedroom.
With the mortgage squeeze,
Yeah,
it's
well,
going to be
yes.
a lot more extensions.
That could be right. I mean, if the applicant is who I think it is, he's the now running the public poll book.
Yeah,
I think it's
catering.
Keith Mickleborough, and
Yeah.
he's also Beetroot Catering.
That's it, yeah.
Anybody got any?
Is there any objections?
Two things I guess I would say. One is just looking at it, I think I'm right, in that it's, yeah, there. One, I'm going to sound like a broken record now, but for the last few meetings we've had, I think, how are they proposing to get the tools, etc., to this place?
I mean, it is not, I think the way it's not particularly a wide road.
Yeah.
Because it's a private road off.
Yes, it's like my road, it's about just a bit bigger than a car.
Yes, it's not particularly large. Do we have a picture that shows the actual location?
Well, this is what I've been trying to,
No, I don't think.
I don't think
It's so new, I don't think anything even recognised.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Didn't they get a planning commission on like, on the house range in there? It's sort of like, a range of bed houses. And so
Yes,
like
I mean,
suddenly,
Changed it.
within a year, it's now changed the housing balance.
yes, I
I
mean,
mean, it's soon really from the beginning of the development. It's not even had time to do its job yet.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the plan, the sort of location plan.
Yeah.
Right in the corner there.
So,
I did wonder as well whether the Juliet balcony is overlooking these ones here, but there's no objection, so.
I've not seen any objection.
Probably because no one else
So-
living in the other ones,
Yeah.
that's so new, no one's really.
Here it is, it's the one,
so it's the one at the fire room, yeah, okay, if you look at that on.
that's at the front. This,
Oh,
this
that's
is,
East Road,
this is
yeah.
East Road going this
At the
way.
front.
Here's what was Dovetail, and of course it's now the 2 properties that are under construction here. And this is the run of the new properties here, and this one's right on the end. Of course, it does mean you couldn't put a skip or anything on here, because you wouldn't be able to get anything past
Actually,
it.
be on East Road again,
So-
like everything else.
Potentially, on East Road, which I've said.
So let's stay underneath.
Dovetail
That Dovedale.
That's
was
where the
the
two
name-
new houses
It
are
was
now.
the name of the bungalow that was there.
okay, yes, I was going to say, that's absolutely.
That plan, of course, is already out of date because that isn't
That's
a
the
single
one right
property,
there.
it's now a double property. And at one time we were trying to get in properties on
Yeah,
that
they were.
particular site. Secondly,
These
we're
are all
getting
occupied
to-
though, they are all occupied now.
I think my two issues, one is basically what Rick's saying. How can we, I think there's got to be we're quick to say, you can't turn a 2 into a 3 or a 3 into a 4. I don't see why particularly we should make an exception.
In fact, it's a quarter of 5, so
Yeah.
it's not affecting the supply of smaller properties. I think that's the difference. I'd have been more concerned if it was moving.
It's a problem we've long had in Arundel, is every time a
Yeah,
small
and we have
properties get built,
repeatedly
they,
objected on that
Yeah.
basis, and we have repeatedly found that there is no sympathy with the plan whatsoever to that argument. So
That's frustrating.
it's still one that we tend to make
yes, we
when we
do,
lose
we should,
small
I
properties,
think.
but as I say, this is not a small property.
And the other one is, as I say, where is potential skip going to be?
I mean, they would have to put a skip on East Road. I don't know if that would interfere with the in and out of the co-op. It's bad enough.
Well, I mean, East Road is obviously a very busy road.
Yeah.
You could have construction traffic going along it.
School traffic.
You've got obviously the school just
Deliveries to
from
co-op.
there, and you've got issues potentially with deliveries to the
Yeah.
co-op. I mean, I suppose what one could say is that some form of construction management plan might be required, given the difficulties of vehicles associated with this project not being able, it seems to me, to be able to park in Athena Way itself. And I suppose you might get at least one onto the property.
Did we,
Garages.
so we might discuss where they're going to put their cars, they've got rid of their garage.
Well, they're not getting rid of it entirely.
You're building on top of it.
They're simply building on top of it.
Building on top of it.
But there seems to be 3 places in front of the garage, looking at the way that plan's drawn.
Right.
I have to say,
Maybe we have to ask for some kind of the word's suddenly gone, and say that they can have the planning as long as the doing of it doesn't obstruct traffic in East Road.
so there has to be
Something like that.
so they want a planning condition
That condition.
which
yeah.
requires some form of acceptable construction management
I
plan.
think that's going to become my middle name.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, we do ask for that from time to time.
yes, we seem to be asking for it more and more now,
Yeah.
with justification, I think,
Because of the co-op, I mean, the co-op actually shouldn't be having large vehicles coming during there was originally when they got their planning permission, that was
Except-
strictly.
except that we've now seen that the Waitrose applications just been
Yes.
granted. Consequently, I suspect we will see similar applications from other establishments that might currently have limitations.
Yeah.
And they'll all have to be granted because if you allow one, I can't see the logic in not allowing it for others. Subject to construction management plan. Right, well, that deals with the 3 applications that are before us. You'll see the outcomes of various planning matters, where it makes some comments, a number of them, all of the applications I think were granted. I don't think we need any discussion on any of those. Planning appeals, there are none, so that brings us on to what is described as Riverside update. And 10 says decide next steps. The position is that there was an approach made to the council to get involved in some potential discussions around the future of Riverside.
What are we talking about? You mean the
The old
building?
Riverside pub.
Sorry?
The old Riverside pub.
Oh, they see, I couldn't work out what that riverside was. As
Ah,
I
right.
live on a riverside as well, that's,
Right, it should perhaps have said Riverside PH, that might have made it clearer. So, yes, the building that we've all been fraught with for about the last 30 odd years. So there was a discussion which involved the mayor, myself, representatives from the Hamilton business community led by Philip Adams, and two of our three NNC councillors, councillors Harrison and Best. Now, as it happens, Councillor Best has reasons to go to the Channel Islands, where the owner of said establishment happens to live. So it was suggested that, on the basis of if the mountain won't come to Mohammed goes to the mountain. So it might actually have appealed rather to Mr. Lane if somebody were pitched up in his patch to speak to him. So we had a kind of a meeting a few weeks ago now. There's been a relatively limited kind of follow-up to it. But the difficulty, as ever, seems to be quite what you can turn that thing into. The most recent thing I read was that the land that sits between the roundabout and the pub is actually owned by North Northamptonshire Council. And it looks as if Mr. Lane would like to be able to acquire that land as part of the package of trying to redevelop. And that's kind of as far as I know the saga.
well, some of the land's an SSI, that's the point.
Some of the land, obviously at the back, going down towards the river, is also an SSI.
Do you know what that is?
Site of special scientific interest.
Okay,
Let's say.
Has rare plants on it.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
So, mind you, if we do end up with some of the planning reforms that get talked about, you know, things like Great Crested Newts will be out, etc. So I'm betting that sites of special scientific interest are going to be treated particularly differently. But for the moment, it would be. Although it may well be that the plans that might emerge might not involve building on the SSI, because there have been all sorts of plans in the past for converting it into a hotel as
Yeah,
well.
holiday camp type thing.
Who knows what. So I think it's more, I mean, although it says decide next steps, it does seem to me to be probably a matter of simply seeing where things go. My suggestion is simply that we continue to encourage dialogue in which this council plays its part.
Wasn't there a gentleman recently who inquired about?
You're right, there was an approach to the council by an individual who seemed to be interested in the possibility of acquiring it and turning it into a single residence.
Right, okay.
And I think we responded along the lines of, well, we'd be very happy to see something happen to it, but obviously we can't entirely prejudge our response to any specific application, since which time everyone's gone incredibly quiet and we've heard no more. Whether in fact that was somebody who hadn't even made any approach to Mr. Lane, but but he just wanted to sound us out first.
I think he said he was in the very preliminary discussions, so whether,
Certainly nothing emerged from the
No.
meeting I had a few weeks ago to suggest that there was anything like that on the cards. But I'm pretty sure that we would all welcome some way of seeing that building brought back into beneficial use, because it's an eyesore. It comes to the town, somehow, something can be done with it. That works. It's not a question, allow anything at any cost, but something.
So is this Mr. Lane, is he not particularly willing to give up the land?
Sorry, which land?
The riverside, does he want to actually use something with it?
Well, I mean, he's done precisely nothing with it for about 30 odd years.
Over the years, he's
Other than
submitted,
bring forward various planning applications, none of which have resulted in anything happening.
he's
I
not,
think he
not
has a,
over keen on responding to anything
Yeah.
anyway. He's always been very, very.
very, very
And it's
difficult.
not in, of course, our patch.
Technically, because it's the other side of the bridge, it's actually technically in Ashton Parish, but rather like we comment on things that have an impact on storage, or things to do with, say, the country park or the marina. The reality is it probably impacts more on Elmdale than it seemed to be part of Ashton, than it would be seen to be part of Ashton, but we wouldn't obviously want to tread on Ashton's toes. That doesn't mean to say we have to slavishly follow what they want. We don't think it's right, but we would certainly want them to be involved in the.
And what looks like a large car park is actually the highway. It's owned by highways.
Really?
Yeah.
So that kind of lay-by effort in front of you, that for years I assumed was part of the pub. In fact, isn't.
Is
Yeah,
it?
It's a public highway. Which I suspect is why it's never been closed off,
I think so.
because of course you can't
Can't,
close it
it's
off.
the highway.
So in terms of a suggestion, I think keep up the dialogue, and when there's something hopefully more positive to report, we'll report it.
Do we happen to know if Ashton Parish Council, do they have more luck with?
No.
No, okay.
They experience exactly the same difficulties, partially because he's not living locally,
Right.
doesn't seem desperately keen to respond to either Ashton or Elmdale, which is why when Councillor Best said, well, look, I actually go over to the island on which he is, the thought of making it easier for him to speak to somebody is quite an attractive one. What I haven't had is any opportunity to discuss with Councillor Best whether he's yet had any joy or whether I can rebuffed or quite what's what. And I just didn't have time to follow it up, I'm afraid, before tonight's meeting. We've been away for a few days. So that's that. Next, the suggestion of putting a radio mast of some height in the marketplace has been raised. And if you've read the paperwork, you'll see that they've looked at all sorts of sites and come up with all sorts of reasons as to why none of those are putting it in the middle of the marketplace.
you see the paperwork.
This, of course, is in the middle of the conservation area. Marketplace is to some extent our pride and joy of this town. And anything which detracts from it would seem to me to be a thoroughly bad idea. And I'll make it clear straight away, personally, I think this is a thoroughly bad idea.
David, you're talking like a lawyer. Yes, giving all sorts of putting it nicely.
Well,
All sorts of possibilities. That certainly is one of them, is it?
Well, unfortunately, we are being asked to consider it, but I think we must give a response, and I know what my response would be.
Yeah.
From your comments, Councillor Chester, I can guess what yours are. You don't exactly like it, either, do you? Do other councillors have a different view, or are you as perturbed as Councillor Chester and I by this proposal?
Bizarre.
Right.
Bizarre. No other word.
Even the attraction of 5G, I don't think could make
No.
people want that
No.
there.
I'll keep my rubbish signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite happily.
No, absolutely awful.
I think if this was the old jukebox jury, I would question the thing to say miss. We don't like it. We think it's utterly the wrong place for it. And I don't know that we need any greater feedback to them than
No.
that.
Oh, yeah, just, be dreadful for the school, it's going to be people.
Now, why does they put it in, so that we will object to it strongly and have to look at some other, not quite as awful
That's
situation
devious of them.
and say, well, at least that's not the
Bait and
marketplace.
switch. That's all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
you know,
We can only deal with what's in front of us. What's in front of us is distinctly.
Yeah, but that's because, I know the number.
Clark Telecom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we might well agree that there is the potential for wanting something like this, but in the right place.
I think
Now, I don't want to comment on each and every one of the sites that they reject,
Cool,
because we'll be here half the night.
On that public list.
But I have to say that I think they just have to come back with something that's hideous.
what's wrong with where the present one is?
There's a bit of grass, that's a great ball. Can we go there?
Yeah, might have a similar view about that, actually. Can you just imagine Remembrance Day, because we have to stand either side of this thing, looking up between.
All the phones going on.
Yeah.
Well, I've tried twice to have a smart meter and failed because of the rubbish signal. And I will even forego the smart meter.
Yes, if it means we don't get it.
Like you,
Right. I don't think we can be any clearer, really. It is utterly in the wrong place.
Maybe Val's right then, maybe they're sort of thinking, okay, let's give them the absolute worst place we can possibly put it. And then we'll think of something less.
Yeah.
There was a time when there was the rugby club was suggested, wasn't it?
And we were going to do something on Blackpool, weren't we?
Yeah.
Have they honestly gone and stood in the square and said,
This is a good idea.
this is going to go here and they're going to be fine?
I mean, whether as a council we own any land on which something like that could go, I don't know.
Don't say flat and fit.
No,
With a wreck.
I did wonder about the wreck, if there was a location somewhere on there, which wouldn't be.
Just behind where the new houses have been built.
You know, that's
I
as
think
as
that's
close to
usually go.
Garthy as you can get it.
Yeah. One of the things that I usually go in towns,
Mm.
on top of
It's
buildings,
a
don't they?
patch.
Yes, I mean, as I say, they did run through all sorts of quote unquote options and then explain why they had rejected each and every one of them. I mean, we could, I suppose, be slightly more positive in the sense of saying, look, you know, we're happy to engage with you in discussions on a suitable alternative site, but we utterly object to the idea of going into the marketplace because of its impact on the conservation area.
Anyway,
But I'll have to meet with them and have it. And indeed, I suppose we could show them tracts of land that we own, in case there's anything new.
We'd also for the market, I mean, presumably the market isn't set up.
That's true.
Well, it might impact on the market,
It's there.
as it's proposed location. Yeah, I mean, I think it probably would impact the market as well. Right. I think we probably discussed that as far as we need to. Planning advisory panel. We all agreed that this was a good idea in principle, and then essentially nothing's happened. And I can't believe we've seen lots of remarkable mega applications with the two that have now got planning permission and the Stoke Hill Road one, which we've already looked at 3 times. There will be others. There will probably be the one on Herne Road sooner or later. There may well be one on Benefit Road. So I do feel that we do need to kind of get this thing moving. We sort of bandied around 1 or 2 names, and I think Councillor Davis had come up with a couple. But it had all, I think other things rather got in the way.
I think so, I think we've had
put
too
it
much
that
on
way.
our plate, to be honest.
So that we haven't managed to take it forward, but I do feel that X months on from the town meeting, we do rather need, well, we said this was going to be done, we do really rather need to get on with it. I will endeavour to put together a draft letter to come out from the council to people that either I proposed or Councillor Davis proposed. And again, if anybody thinks of anybody, either now or at any point, who you think, he or she's got an expertise in this, that or t'other, it may be worth thinking about adding them to the list. I mean, they're obvious things. Anybody, town planners who actually do this for a living, I do know one quite well, but he doesn't live locally. I don't think I could really persuade him to get that involved in Angle. Obviously, there's more.
I think if we put our minds to it again,
Yeah,
I think
So- whilst I'm busy trying to draft a letter to go to these people, if anybody gets any bright ideas about people, can they let me know?
yeah.
Not just names, but contact details as well, and then the office will approach them. I mean, clearly, if we approach a number of people and it just falls flat, well, at least right. On the other hand, if we do find that there are people who are interested in getting involved with that as a project, then so much the better.
I did approach Judy, the bat lady. She wasn't massively keen, I might have another go.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's probably.
It should be quite strong on them. But there are other people now, you see, there's the person who's produced that lovely leaf on trees.
Yeah,
She might be a useful
that
person.
might be useful.
Because it's only a matter of them being there to be called on if we want.
That's right, and
Yeah,
they may
not
not
to
be
meet
called on
once a
from,
month or anything like that.
literally, it might be once every, to some extent, once every 3 months, but it would be nice to.
I mean, we might need somebody to look at the SSI.
Yeah. And if there is somebody who has.
See what exactly there is on there.
I remember trying to check that out years ago and finding it very difficult to find information at that time. So we'll have a go at trying to relaunch that, if you can relaunch something that didn't really go off the ground in the first place. Anybody else got any comments on planning advisory panel? In which case, it's only just come up to 9 o'clock, so that sounds like a good idea. Any other relevant matters to report?
No.
Lisa, have you got anything? No, I can't think of anything either, so just before, about 5 to 9, according to the clock, I'll pull the meeting to a close.
Thank you.
Thank you.